Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and today we have got a fun episode where we just finished our first real week of college football. It's in the books. We had the ACC, the Big 12 return to action. We've got the SEC coming up here in a couple weeks, and we got the big news middle of this week. The Big 10 will return. It looks like the Pac-12 on the way back as well. So a lot of college football that we have got to be able to talk about. Really, really excited to get going on all of these prospects across the entire country. A couple of the big group of 5 conferences as well we will be talking about over the next couple of weeks. Saturday Scouting, we're going to kick things off with Ben Fennell as always. We're going to talk about some matchups to watch this week, some traits that matter to us at the running back position in our Under the Hood segment. So excited to get into that conversation with Ben. After that, we've got Mr. Relevant, where I'm going to catch up with Pro Football Focus's Mike Renner, talk about some players that he's excited about for this upcoming college football season and the NFL Draft in 2021. After that, we will continue our competition in Pick 6 with Ross Tucker, keeping score throughout the year. We'll see who won last week's competition and who's got things going in the right direction here for this following week, for here in week 2, week 3 really, in college football. Before we get on to it the rest of the show, just a quick reminder, go on to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment. It's the best way to boost this show up. If you're loving this new format with 2 episodes a week and the new segments, I hope you guys are enjoying On the Clock with Dane Brugler, Chris McPherson, Ben Fennell. Hope you guys like this Under the Hood segment that we debuted last week. We'll continue it here today with Ben. If you guys like everything you're hearing, just go let us know. Go on to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, leave us a rating, and leave us a comment. That being said, let's get going here. Let's get things started with Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, let's kick things off here on Saturday Scouting with our draft buzz. And Ben, the news that so many people have been waiting for, the Big 10 making their return in just a few weeks, mid-October. What was your first reaction to hearing the news that the Big 10 is making a comeback?
Well, the first reaction is immediately, what does that mean for the Big 10 players that decided to opt out on the season? Obviously, they opted out under the circumstances of not having fall football in 2020. So I wonder if they're going to be given kind of a window to rejoin the team. So that was kind of my initial thought of hearing the news. It was kind of expected. The Pac-12 sounds like they're getting close and will be, soon to follow. But, it's tough for the Pac-12 and the Big 10 to sit on the sidelines watching college football being played, safely on the past 2 Saturdays and even some Thursdays and Fridays here and there. But, I'm just glad that they were able to come to a decision and, we'll see some football shortly.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that's going to come down with all the guys that opted out is, did they sign with an agent yet? And if they signed with an agent, did they collect money? Did they do this? Did they do that? Unless the NCAA is going to completely waive all of that because of the unique circumstances, that would be a little bit surprising to me, just considering the NCAA's history. But with how they've handled this matter over the last 6 months, I don't know that they really have like much of a leg to stand on. It's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out for those guys. But if they didn't sign with an agent, the opt-out is a piece of paper. It's a tweet.
That's a good point, because really that's the first step in declaring yourself as a professional, is getting professional guidance, representation, whether that's an agent or a marketing firm. And we've seen some people already sign, like Joe Tryon out in Washington, signed with a big agency. So there has been some players to go down that road already. We'll be interested to see not only the NCAA, but the conferences and the teams, how they're all going to react to that.
I know a lot of coaches, college coaches, had been telling their guys, like, if they were opting out, they were cool. They say, like, you do what's best for you. Don't sign with an agent until we figure out for sure that there's going to be no football this fall. That way, that in case this happens, we can bring you back, and there's no worries about what was going on. I know there was a report out there that Rondell Moore from Purdue was basically just working out at home, that he had not signed with an agent yet. So I would imagine that if Rondell Moore wants to opt back in, if he decides to, he's going to have no issue. It won't be an uphill battle to try and get him eligible and on the roster for whenever Purdue opens their season. But all those guys will have to make those decisions. We've already seen reports that the kids from Ohio State are going to be back in the fold. It's going to be interesting over the next 7 to 10 days. What happens with Micah Parsons and all those guys. And then once some news comes out officially on the Pac-12, we'll see what happens out west as well. So certainly big news in the college football world. But that being said, for this weekend, we've got a bunch of matchups that are going to be interesting, Ben. And each of us, we're going to do what we do each week. We're going to pick a couple of matchups, one-on-one battles that we're excited to watch. I'll let you kick things off. What's the first matchup you're excited to see this Saturday?
Well, coming off a loss last week, I'm really interested, and this is going to shock some people, to see the Citadel go up against Clemson, particularly because of Citadel linebacker Willie Eubanks. Huge week last week in the loss against South Florida. 12 tackles, a sack, 3 TFLs. But it's what he did last year. He was a Southern Conference Defensive Player of the Year, 11.5 TFLs, sacks, plays in the pass game. This is his big showing out party against the high and mighty Clemson, particularly Travis Etienne. He's going to get caught in space. Want to see if he has the athleticism and the play speed to really be an NFL prospect. No disrespect to the Southern Conference, but want to see him against some Power 5 teams, and there's no better than Clemson. They beat Georgia Tech last year, and they played Alabama in 2018. Disappointing opener last week against South Florida, but everyone's going to have eyes on that Clemson tape when they're studying Willie Eubanks as a prospect. So very excited for his opportunity.
Huge matchup there for Willie Eubanks. I'm going to go into the ACC here. Duke, Boston College. And I watched that whole Duke game last week against Notre Dame. And Chris Rump, the pass rusher, you talked about him last week. We talked about him in our ACC preview. Held off the stat sheet in terms of the sack column. Did end up with 5 tackles in the game. But just a quick refresher on Chris Rump. He is a long, lean pass rusher, very, very light, certain kind of player. He's not going to be for everybody. Certainly not a guy that you would imagine is going to be a 3-down, certainly a defensive end and a 4-3, potentially puts on a little bit of weight and becomes a 3-4 outside backer. But when you look at how he's used in that Duke defense, he's moved around a lot. And when I wrote down the matchup, I wrote Duke Joker Chris Rump because for this matchup, and he's going to see a little bit of this guy, Boston College left guard Zion Johnson, who to me is one of the best interior offensive linemen in this class. He is a senior for the Boston College Eagles. He's a guy who transferred up from a smaller school, made his first year as a starter last year, was all ACC. He's one of the most athletic offensive linemen I've studied in this class. And honestly, over the last couple of years, this guy moves really, really well. He's got really light feet and pass protection. So, when Chris Rump goes up against Zion Johnson, and because they do line Chris Rump in a 2-point stance over the guard a lot, very, very often in that scheme, it's going to be an interesting kind of battle because both guys obviously very athletic for their respective positions. So that's kind of an interesting battle. I'll be interested to watch in pass protection there, Ben.
Yeah, I was going to have you explain why would a guard be seeing an outside linebacker joker player, but exactly right. Duke will line him up and down the defensive line, trying to isolate matchups. Did it against Notre Dame. I didn't see if they did it last week, but they definitely did it last year. And when you get this skinny 225-pound loose pass rusher against a big 330-pound offensive guard, he can really blur past them, and you could see just the matchup advantage he has. But another interesting matchup, a little ACC battle here, Louisville and Miami. Louisville's got a bunch of interesting receivers. We know Tutu Atwell from the Miami area, probably going to face up a couple guys he played in high school. But Des Fitzpatrick on the other side. 4 for 110 and a touchdown last week. Much more prototypical size. He's about 6'2", 210. Tutu is, 5'8", 170 pounds. It's a over-the-top speed guy. So just want to see how they compete against the speed of that Miami secondary. I had my eyes on Trevor Reed, the offensive tackle, one of the top JUCO transfers coming out of Georgia Military Academy, I believe, was pegged to be the left tackle starter for Louisville, but has started the season on the bench as a second string. Didn't get to start last week against Western Kentucky, and I wanted to see him against Miami edge rusher Quincy Roche, the Temple transfer. So not looking like we'll see that matchup for him.
No, it doesn't look like it. And to me, my matchup was going to be focused on that Miami defensive front. And while we won't see Trevor Reed, Mikael Cunningham, the quarterback for Louisville, is a guy that has really gotten some buzz over the last few weeks, and obviously had a really impressive debut against Western Kentucky. You mentioned the numbers Des Fitzpatrick was able to put up in that game. But you look at this Miami defensive front, not only is there Quincy Roche, a guy that we talked about in our ACC preview, we've talked about him over the last couple of weeks, But another guy that we haven't really talked about, we mentioned Jalen Phillips, the other defensive end on the other side, who was a 5-star recruit at UCLA, number 1 player in the country. Defensive tackle, Nesta Jade Silvera, rising junior. This is a guy who I wrote down Tim Jernigan while watching Jade Silvera. And this is a guy that high-energy kid, very violent, chases the action. He cleans up piles, really stout and tough to move off the line of scrimmage. And he was able to change the line really well with a quick first step, and he's got some initial pop on contact. He's more disruptive than he is productive, but I think this is a guy that is able, to get into the backfield, change the course of the play. He comes from Plantation, American Heritage High School down there, Ben, where that's Brian Burns, Sonny Michel, Devin Singletary. I mean, they've put out NFL player after NFL player after NFL player over the course of the last few years. Patrick Surtain, the head coach down there. And I think when you're looking at Nesta Jade Silvera, he's kind of an underrated player on the interior of that Miami defensive line. He was first brought to my attention this past spring by Jonathan Garvin, who just told me this is a guy that's going to be on the rise. And I studied him this summer and really liked him. So I think when you're looking at this Miami defensive front, yeah, they're going to have Jalen Phillips. They're going to have Quincy Roche. But keep an eye on Jade Silvera as well, number 1 at defensive tackle, trying to get after Mikael Cunningham, who has been a good playmaker. He's got a lightning-quick release. Interesting player that I have not studied, but just off the hoof, kind of an impressive kid I'm excited to see in this matchup here, Ben.
He had a couple pressures last week at 300 pounds. And interesting to note, Jalen Phillips actually led all the defensive linemen in snaps last week in their battle against UAB. So that's more than the Quincy Roche transfer and some of those other guys. Really interested to see how Jalen Phillips was going to acclimate himself after, being away for the game for about a year.
No question. And coming off the injuries, he's got, the other issues that he was dealing with. So, retired from college football for a brief moment. So good to see him come off, and have that strong debut. Let's get to our next segment here, mock draft roundup.
Whoa, Fran, hold on. There's a Louisiana Monroe player that I was just dying to talk about because he's going
here we go.
Texas State this week. Just really quick, I want to talk about Corey Straughters, a corner from Louisiana Monroe. Going to see some of that Texas State receiver, Jeremiah Hadel. We've been talking about the past couple of weeks. Had a really nice punt return touchdown last week as well. But Corey Straughters, not enough people know about this kid. He's 5'10", 180-pound senior. Look at his tape last year. 10 PBUs, 5 interceptions, the lowest passer rating in the country when targeted. Only 12 catches allowed on 43 targets. That's a 13.7 QB rating. Very, very stingy out there in coverage. Last year against Texas State, 7 targets, no catches, 3 PBUs, 1 interception. So this is a dominant press corner. Can play also an off and that kind of side saddle with his eyes in the backfield. But a lot of interesting players on UL Monroe. If you happen to come across the TV and see them on the dial, they have a tight end, Josh Peterson, son of Doug Peterson, first team All-Sun Belt last year. Running back Josh Johnson had 1,200 yards last year and 11 touchdowns. Bunch of NFL prospects on that team.
Yeah, he was a team that we talked about last week with Ross Tucker in our pick 6. And we'll see if they're able to come up with a win over Texas State here this weekend. I'm glad you brought up Corey Slaughter. All right, so now let's transition to our mock draft roundup, where every week, again, we're going to pick a mock draft, see who they've got the Eagles selecting, and also who else is going on around that area. So our mock drafts this week, we went to A.J. Schultz, who did a mock for Pro Football Network. He had the Eagles picking at 24th overall. Here are the 5 picks before the Eagles. 19 overall, the Tennessee Titans selecting Alabama defensive tackle Christian Barmore, who should have been the winner of our On the Clock segment earlier this week with Ben and with Dane and with C-Mac, but that we'll leave that aside for now. 20th overall, the Buffalo Bills taking Penn State defensive end Jason Owe. 21st overall, the New York Jets taking Michigan defensive end Kwity Paye. The Colts at 22 taking Hamza Nasruddin, the safety from Florida State. And then 23rd overall, the Vikings taking Oregon safety Javon Holland. So, Ben, what's your takeaway here from those 5 picks?
A couple interesting ones. We're obviously heavy in the trenches there at Barmore and a couple edge players. My first thing is some positional fits. The Titans just took Jeffrey Simmons last year. I think he's going to be a good long-term trench player. I know you can never have too many of those bodies, but readdressing first-round defensive tackle. Same with the Colts. Kind of thought they need to get more pass rushers, get younger. I like Hamza Nasruddin, but seems like they have a lot of bodies in that secondary. But he's a really interesting playmaking safety that I think someone's going to take in that mid-level of the first round. Same thing with Javon Holland, good nickel press corner there for Oregon. So a couple of interesting players. I'm not really sure what the consensus on Kwity Paye right now, or even his positional fit at the next level here.
I think the other interesting one to me is the Bills with Jason Oweh. Obviously, with the Big Ten returning the action, I think that kind of opens the door for Oweh to potentially be in this draft. And he's still, has never started a game, right? I mean, we're talking pure potential here. But remember, the Pagulas, or the owners of the Bills, very deep connections at Penn State, and so that's just something to keep an eye on there. I do like that connection.
And let me tell you, Fran, if he legitimately is running 4.33 at 6'5", 275 pounds, if he just gets himself on the field, he could be one of the biggest risers in college football across the board.
No question. So the 5 after the Eagles, 25th overall, Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Florida tight end Kyle Pitts. The Tampa Bay Bucks at 26, taking Clemson running back Travis Etienne. 27th overall, the Patriots taking Tennessee left guard Trey Smith, the guy we talked about last week in this segment. The Dallas Cowboys at 28, taking USC defensive tackle Jay Tufele. And then 29, the New Orleans Saints taking Washington corner Elijah Molden. What was your takeaway from that group, Ben?
A couple notes here. I think Trey Smith to New England is a great fit. Seems like that big, mauling, bruly, type of power run offensive lineman, fits that mold of like a Shaq Mason or even a Michael Owenu, who was a 6th-round pick that played a lot for him this past week. Travis Etienne, Ronald Jones, Tampa Bay, just that kind of conversation seems like it's a little repetitive right now. The conversation is going to be, what's the difference between Travis Etienne and a Ronald Jones? What has Ronald Jones struggled with in his first 2-3 years that's prevented him from getting on the field, being productive? The Steelers with an athletic Y option at tight end. I wasn't sure that was allowed out there in Western Pennsylvania. Typically going for more of the two-way, guys that can block for you, the Heath Millers of the world. And the interior defensive lineman to Dallas trend continues. I feel like we've seen that in mock drafts for the last 3, 4, 5 years since seemingly they let go of Jay Ratliff like 10 years ago. Everybody wants to plug in interior defensive linemen to that group, but looking at them on paper, they could still use it, especially with the Gerald McCoy situation not going as planned. A couple interesting picks there. Yeah,
we watched Dallas this past week taking on the LA Rams. The Eagles face on Sunday, and that defensive line, man, I mean, they've got some talent up front. Certainly could get a little bit younger on the interior. They want to see what Tristan Hill, the defensive tackle they took in the 2nd round last year, what he's able to turn into. Had some good snaps from what we saw this past weekend. But Jay Tufele, I do like that fit in that scheme with Mike Nolan. So I do like that fit there. Interesting selection for the Cowboys at 28. So now let's get to the Eagles pick. 24th overall, A.J. Schultz has them taking TCU safety Darius Washington. And here's the blurb that came with the pick. Philly needs as many playmakers in the secondary as they can at this stage, with 3 safeties hitting the market this offseason and Rodney McLeod up next year. This is a position of need for the Philly defense. Ben, what are your thoughts on Darius Washington to the Eagles and your thoughts on the value there?
Listen, he's on every all-freshman team last year. Impressive year. 5 interceptions, a couple PBUs. But he's a sub-package player for the most part. Only played a shade over 400 snaps, so it's about a 60% playtime player. But this is a redshirt sophomore. This is a guy that really hasn't been on the field a whole lot for TCU. He's 5'8", 179-pound, redshirt sophomore. I just think it's way too early for him at this point. Impressive year. He's small. He's very feisty. He's got the ball skills. He just showed up on the freak list for, 39-inch vertical and some really impressive weightlifting stuff. If he really can bench 370 pounds at 179 pounds, that is wild. That's more than double his body weight, 640-pound squat. I see that Captain Munnerlyn, Tim Jennings role, and honestly, I think the best comparison is probably Nicole Roby Coleman, who we have here in Philadelphia, who's 5'7", 180 pounds, very similar role, very similar skill set. I just think Darius just showed a little bit more his freshman year. I'm not sure Nicole Roby Coleman, he ran 4.53 at 169 pounds at his pro day or the combine, pretty much got him undrafted because of that. I'm not sure if he was dealing with something. He is not a 4.53 type of player. He's much more explosive than that. But I think that's kind of an interesting comp considering he's already here in Philadelphia. But that's the mold and the style of player I think Darius Washington is.
Well, it's funny you bring Nicole Roby Coleman up because he was my guest on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, Fueled by Gatorade, this week. The latest one that came out. Ben, you were on that episode as well, so make sure you guys go find that podcast wherever podcasts can be found. I'll tell you what, Nicole was an awesome interview. We talked about like his college career at USC, playing for Monty Kiffin out there with the Trojans, what brought him out there, and then just saw a lot of the things about defensive back play that he's learned along the way from guys like Darius Bird and Stephon Gilmore. It was a really fun interview, so make sure you go check that out on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. All right, so Ben, let's go under the hood here in our last segment for this episode. Last week we talked about the slot corner position, so we're going to pick a different position this week, and this one is a little bit of a different kind of conversation. I want to talk about backup running back, and obviously there are multiple backup running backs on a roster, but that's kind of why this I think can be an interesting conversation. I want to go to you first. What are some traits that matter most to you when you're evaluating a player and you say, you know what, this guy could be a backup running back for my team?
You want me to go with all three, or you want to do a 1-1 back and forth?
That's a good question. Why don't we go? Let's go 1-1 back and forth.
All right, that sounds good. So the first one I would go with when, trying to come up with the traits, the skill set, the role of a deemed backup running back. And the first thing I would have written down here is he must have the ability to run the offense and be plugged into the offense. I think that's so key, and that's just so overlooked. You can't have these guys with countering skill sets or maybe a role or traits that doesn't fit the offense. You need to be a fit for the system. You need to be able to come in and plug and play to be a backup player. You can't be specialized or to have certain style of plays called for you particularly, because then your backup role and your limitations of just being a plug and play player or being needed on the drop of a dime isn't as seamless of a transition. So I think it's kind of a surface topic, but I think it's a little overlooked when you're considering the backup players. You have to be able to fit into the system and run the offense.
I love this. Okay, so I'm glad that you brought that up first, because to me, when I'm thinking about backup running back, I really kind of split it into two different buckets. You have your specialized player, like whether it's like a satellite kind of like dynamic, a pass catching back, something along those, a role playing back from that standpoint. But then you also need that well-rounded 3-down backup. And I thought that earlier this summer, Daniel Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks over on the Move the Sticks podcast, they had this discussion about constructing your running back depth chart. And to me, when you look at that, the way that they kind of put it together, it really makes sense to me. And it's a really kind of a clean visual. Obviously, you've got your guy that, in an ideal sense, like this is the ideal way that it's set up. You have your number one back who true 3-down player, right? I mean, he can be an early down guy. He's able to impact the game in pass protection, but also as a pass catcher, you can do a lot of different things with him in the passing game. Ideally, the number 2 guy is someone who can also be used, hey, when you want to go 21 personnel and try and mess with defenses that way in terms of, the passing game. And, it brings a little bit of a dynamic element, a good change of pace from that standpoint. Then you want your number 3 to be that well-rounded 3-down backup. I see, a guy that if the number 1 guy goes down, here's the guy that plugs in. He's obviously does not have the same ability as the number 1 guy, but he can step in and still serve that role while your number 2 guy can still be exactly what you need him to be, if that makes sense, right? So, I think of like, if that number 2 is a guy like a Tariq Cohen, right, can be a truly dynamic player and can change the impact of a game, but is he an ideal 3-down running back? No, that's why the Chicago Bears went out and drafted David Montgomery in the second round in 2019, right? So to me, I think when you look at, just how guys fit onto a depth chart, and you and I have these discussions all year long, it's so easy to say, this guy's not a starter, but he's a backup. Okay, well, what kind of a backup is he, and how does he fit onto an NFL team? We could talk about the different schemes and zone and gap and all that stuff, but what does he do for you? I think just the way that a guy can get slotted, I think that's kind of important delineation at the backup running back spot.
Yeah, and I've heard different philosophies too of once you're getting into that 3, 4, 5th running back on the pecking order of your roster. Some people are okay with the specialized skill set as your backup, and that's why they are the backup. Maybe you're the big bruising 240-pound short yardage guy, but you're a C in every other category. But when it's 3rd and 1, he's our best option. And the same conversation can go for those satellite scat backs that you really can't plug and play on early downs, but they do something really well. And it may be catch the ball out of the backfield, or maybe pass pro, or maybe it is special teams. So just having that one thing to kind of hang your hat on, I've heard philosophically some coaches and, people designing the roster are okay with that as well. But my other trait would be for the backup position is just durability. You need to be reliable, both in game, both positionally, both mentally, during the week in practice. You need to be available in order to be a backup player. And I think you can take that conversation of durability and your best ability being availability in a lot of different directions. But particularly the running back position, one that gets beat up with the short shelf life, you need to be a durable player. You need to be reliable for the team.
I love that. And to me, one guy that pops into my mind when we're having that discussion is a guy that the Eagles are going to see next week. The bottom of the Cincinnati Bengals depth chart. A lot of people loved Trayvon Williams coming out of Texas A&M a couple years ago, and I watched him and thought, this guy is a perfect number 3, number 4 running back. Like, you knew all the intangibles. The upside wasn't always there, but a nice physical runner, could chip in a lot of different areas. I think of Corey Clement here in Philadelphia, like the ideal role to do that. And I think also the other aspect of this is pass protection. And look, if you're not going to be the dynamic, kick returner, pass catcher, like we can move around the formation, if you're going to be that 3-down backup means pass protection. Like, you need to be able to hold your own on third down, picking up blitzers from the second and third level. Stick your face in there. Like, we've talked about pass protection before at the running back spot. It's as much about the willingness for the college prospects. You got to be able to. You want to see guys that want to embrace that role. Pass protection, huge for me when it comes to the running back position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last trait, and it's kind of a overarching trait once again that can be categorized through a number of positions, and that's just football IQ, his intelligence, his ability to be quick-minded. I don't need him to be book smart. I don't need him to be a whiz at crossword puzzles or Jeopardy, but I need him to be quick-minded and quick thinking. And really, that running back is an extension of the offensive line and an extension of the quarterback, particularly pre-snap and identifying blitzers, threats, understanding your responsibility. And let me tell you, you get to the NFL, some of those pass protection responsibilities are tough, especially when you get to the offenses that have their backs dual reading multiple defenders from inside to out, particularly handling the defensive coordinators. And these defensive coordinators are working all week to attack your protections and to attack your eyes and to try to, mess with your technique and your assignment. So just having a guy that understands the game, understands protections, understands defenses, and just in a all-encompassing term, just as football IQ, I want a quick-minded running back.
Yeah, and remember, for defensive coordinators, a lot of the time, they want to get you matched up one-on-one in pass rush. Like, that's a win. Like, that's what they want, is to get a defender one-on-one with a running back in the hole, in pass protection. So,
and one of the weird things, Fran's, like, if you're just coming up with the pecking order of positions and you're like, who can we get away with being a dummy out there? He's a really good athlete, but he's a bit of a slow blinker. He's a bit of a dummy. I just think running back is way down that list. I just cannot survive with a dummy at running back. Receiver, maybe. Just a brute, strong pass rusher, defensive lineman, I could probably get away with it. But running back, there's just so much going on upstairs between the ears. I know there's a lot of talented players that are dummies, but it's just tough to have a running back that, is a bit of a slow blinker, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, typically – you said any positions working in the middle of the field, so running back, quarterback, center, linebacker, safety. Those are the positions you need to be the most cerebral, because obviously they're right in the middle of the action. They got things going on all around them, so you need those guys to be very football smart. My last thing, we talked about 3-down player, 3-down player, 3-down player. I need you to be a 4-down player too. And special teams, a huge, huge part of being a backup running back, whether it's as a returner or if it's on coverage units. And, we see the guys that be personal protectors and punt, can they be coverage guys on kickoff? Huge, huge part of playing the position as well. Those guys that have the ability to do that, have the experience doing that, certainly rise up a tick a little bit for me in the pecking order. All right, so last thing here. Who are the guys that we've watched in this class that kind of fit the mold? Or are there guys that you've studied so far, you're like, man, I don't know if this guy could be a starter, but I really feel like he would fit in really well as a number 2, number 3, and a running back.
Well, do you want to do the elite from good category first?
Yeah, we'll hit on that as we kind of talk through it. I feel like we've talked about some of the guys in the NFL that that have certainly fit that. I mentioned Tariq Cohen. I mentioned an Alvin Kamara. Like, to me, like, it's the guys that are the dynamic third down backs. Like, those are the guys where I'm like, those are harder to find, in my opinion. You can find one or two in every class, but, like, what have we said for years? Like, Chris Thompson is, like, the guy. Like, he is the best third down back in the NFL. To me, like, those are the guys that, like, if we're pegging what are the most important backup running backs in the league, it's those guys that have that ability.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You have to have some sort of extra element to you. But, what separates the elite, from just the average or the good, in my opinion, it's either having that multidimensional skill set, the ability to plug and play in a gap scheme or a zone scheme, or you could be a point of entry back or get out to the perimeter, contribute in the pass game. But you got to be able to make plays when the play breaks down. And it's so easy to generate yards when the play's blocked perfectly. But that rarely happens. So the ones that I think that can generate for themselves and create when nothing is there is what separates the C and B level players into the A level players in the NFL, particularly at the running back position.
Yeah, no question. So who are guys that you've watched in college that you feel really fit this mold?
So there's two in this class that I've really kind of lent towards, and I like Kenneth Gainwell out in Memphis, and he's still a little young, but I think his skill set is really fit for the modern NFL game and the way he can contribute in the run and the pass game. Pretty productive between the tackles, has the speed to get to the perimeter and the edge as well, and we've seen what he can do in the pass game, literally running routes like a slot receiver down the field, back shoulders. He's going to be good in the screen game, good in the open field. And a guy whose body type may not suggest he may be a well-rounded third down back, but that's Naji Harris out of Alabama. This guy has done nothing but show up on the field on third down, get his body in position and eyes in the right spot in pass pro, and make a ton of plays in the pass game. He has really good hands. He's good in the open field. His just body type at just a shade under 6'3", you wouldn't allude to being that type of back, but I really think he's as well-rounded a running back as any in this class.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at that, and you saying that, it's not a knock on Gainwell. It's not a knock on Naji Harris. These are guys that we feel can come in and serve those. There are really good backs that are number twos in the league, or are maybe they're a Robin in a committee system. They're the 1B back as opposed to the 1A. You talk about like a Tevin Coleman. You talk about Kareem Hunt. You talk about Philip Lindsay and Latavius Murray, guys that have put good stuff on film so far in their young career. Chase Edmonds has done a lot of good stuff so far in his young career.
Like Fran, has like Darren Sproles ever been in any offense? A guy, now a top 5, all-purpose yards, but seemed like he was that, always that second and third option for some reason. But there's a certain skill set and trait mold to fit for a backup over a starter, and that's just kind of the nature of the position.
So for me, the two guys that I kind of wrote down, Kennedy Brooks from Oklahoma, who I really like. And I talked about him in our Big 12 preview. I felt like this guy has a really good knack for playing the position. I liked his vision, his ability to make people miss. I thought he was really subtle, really patient as a route runner. I thought that there's upside there in the passing game, but I saw him as a really good 3-down backup. And then Max Borgie from Washington State. This is a guy that certainly is proven as a pass catcher. You look at him as a route runner out of the backfield. I didn't know that I saw a true 3-down starter in the league, but a guy that can come in and fill a role in the passing game. What Max Borgie can do. And to me, those were two guys that kind of struck me as potential backups in different molds, right? I didn't know that Max Borgie was a true 3-down backup, and I don't know that Brooks has quite the upside in the passing game that Borgie has. But I could see both guys as number 2 or number 3 guys on a running back depth chart when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and there's even a couple other guys that are a little unconventional mold-wise, like Ramondre Stevenson, Oklahoma, who's nearly 240, or Connor Haywood at Michigan State, 6 foot, 233. More of those big bruising backs are going to be the short yardage type of guys in the NFL. They can easily get themselves into that RB3 mold with showing they can contribute on special teams. And if you have just that one thing to hang your hat on, and maybe you can be a lead back for somebody and maybe be a versatile skill set blocker out in space or on the perimeter. So I don't think you always have to be in that scat back role which is becoming so popular on third down, to make it on the back end of that running back room.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. Well, Ben, this was a fun discussion, man. Great stuff this week as always. We will talk to you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Before we continue with the episode, I just want to take a quick second to remind everyone that we're just under 2 months away from Election Day on November 3rd. Did you know that 4 years ago, in the last general election, 100 million eligible voters did not participate in that election? And I don't care who you support, but that number is entirely too high, and we have got to fix that as a country. So I've got one question for you. Are you registered to vote? And then, do you know where you can go to vote in your district? Have you checked to see if you can vote early? Do you know what time your polling place opens? Voting matters, not just for the presidential election, but obviously for our local and state elections as well. Please, it's all of our civic duty to make sure that our voices are heard. Get out and vote on November 3rd.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, joining us this week here on Mr. Relevant on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, Pro Football Focus's Mike Renner. Mike, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me back, Fran.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, look, I love getting you on the show every year and just kind of getting your thoughts on players that you are higher on than others in the industry. And last year when I brought you on, we talked a lot about Jalen Reagor, who ended up being the first-round pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm excited to hear you predict who the first round pick is for the Eagles in 2021. Give us a name, one or two that you are just really high on that maybe others in the industry aren't as high on. I'm excited to get some guys that you feel a little bit differently about, maybe one on offense, one on defense.
The one on offense, I might be changing my mind here soon after last weekend. But Brock Purdy, the Iowa State quarterback,
Sure.
Awful game this past week against Louisiana. But he's the kind of guy to where he's not going to impress. He's not going to go in the first round because of his tools. He's not Trey Lance. He's not Trevor Lawrence. He doesn't have that body type, that size, that arm. But he's very accurate with football. And what he does have is performance with a bad supporting cast. And it's similar to guys like Daniel Jones coming out, Jared Goff coming out, where they shouldn't be good. You know, that situation, you should not be performing well in a situation like those guys were. And so the fact that they are, it's almost impossible to compare what Purdy does in Iowa State's offense to what someone like Justin Fields does, when Justin Fields can sit back there for 4.5 seconds every game, no matter who he's facing, and have wide receivers running wide open down the football field. And Purdy really just never gets that chance. So I just think the way he plays the game is very much a gamer, is someone I'd be willing to take a chance on, probably higher than, like I said, where most people have him right now.
Yeah, he's a guy that I just like. I love the way that he plays. Like the tools aren't all there, but I love his play personality, just the way that he is able to work inside the pocket. I agreed. It was a rough one for him this past week, but certainly a guy that I really just enjoyed watching on tape. Let me ask you this as just a quick follow-up. If I were to ask you where, if you look at players that, like overall, if I were to ask you which players grade out highest for you guys there, from PFF College, that maybe you personally don't quite see as high, is there a name that kind of comes to mind as a guy that maybe like you guys as a collective are really high on, but you personally, you just don't see it when you look at the traits?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's Naji Harris, the Alabama running back. And he grades out really well because he's almost impossible to tackle at the college level. He's a horse. He's like, 6'2", 230 something, breaks a ton of tackles, gets a ton of yak. But his career long carry, something like 36 yards or something, like 35 yards, excuse me. Like he just has not been a home run threat over the course of his career. And there's only so much value you're bringing to the table. So even though he has graded out well and did grade out well as a receiver last year too, I mean, remember that catch against LSU was nasty. Yeah. I think he has ball skills, but again, it's just how dynamic, how much of a big play threat are you going to be? Because that's what wins, or that's what I want to see at the running back position in the NFL nowadays. Some sort of semblance of that, because I think if you're just a short yardage between the tackles running back, you're just limited in the value you're going to be, bringing to the table.
Sure. Is there I know last year when you came on the show last fall, we talked about like positions that PFF has just had a really good history of kind of projecting guys that maybe the collective, the group think isn't really that high on, but you guys were able to kind of pinpoint a name here or there. Is there a player that you would say you guys are high on here for 2021 who just based off his profile, the position that he plays, your guys' history at that position that you feel like just a little bit extra confidence that he's going to pan out in the NFL?
Yeah, I think our grading is the best along the line of scrimmage because that's the closest thing to, the baseball interaction, the 1v1, a big sample size because you'll get, one-on-one matchups, offensive, defensive line, 600 times a year. Like that is a season in baseball. Like that is an actual big enough sample size to feel good when a guy, even if his physical tools aren't great, performs well. And the guy who I'm going to mention, his physical tools just happen to be pretty damn good. Carlos Basham from Wake Forest. I'm not sure people are super high on him, but for us on our board, I believe he's a top 12 player right now. I just feel very comfortable with 50 plus pressures each of the last two seasons, an elite grade last year in 2019. It didn't do much last week against Clemson, but Trevor Lawrence just getting the ball out of his hands within like 2 seconds every single snap. So, but I think he was number 2 on Bruce Feldman's streaks list. Very explosive guy, very big. To me, he's Marcus Davenport-esque, but a little further along as a pass rusher. And it's kind of a tried and true method in terms of just if you're big, explosive, and productive at the college level, chances are that's going to work out in the NFL for you as well.
One player I know that you guys are pretty high on as well is Syracuse safety Andre Cisco. Has been just consistently productive throughout the course of his career. Had another pick last week, his first game here in his junior season. I'd love to get your evaluation on him, and also to kind of paint the full picture. Any concerns that you have about him moving forward into the NFL as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely concerns with his game. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He's one of the most up and down players I've seen in college football over the course of his career, but the up is 13 picks in 23 games, like over a half pick a game he's averaged over the course of his career at Syracuse. And another guy, it's like, you're at Syracuse, you're not supposed to be picking off a ton of passes. And the fact that he is means he's a little something different there. They moved him to the slot this year, which is going to be interesting to see because as a deep safety, he just freelanced so much. Like that guy was out of position way too much in that defense, gave up too many big plays. He also made a ton of plays. He also has 4.3 speed. He's a pretty big dude at 207 pounds. So I do think Andre Cisco, you can reel in. I'd rather take a chance on a guy and reeling in that low end, trying to kind of eliminating those negative plays on the back end than teaching a guy to be a playmaker. I don't think you can do that.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's like universal across the board for me. Is I'd rather have to kind of reel a guy in as opposed to try and light that fire under him. Now, you are a Notre Dame guy. You're a Notre Dame grad. We've got a lot of listeners on the show who are Notre Dame fans. Who is your favorite Notre Dame prospect right now? It doesn't necessarily need to be for this draft class if you don't want it to be, but someone that that's playing for that team right now that you feel like, all right, like this guy has it for the NFL.
It's not even close. Kyle Hamilton, sophomore safety, not going to be in this year's draft.
Yep.
Hopefully not in next year's draft either. Hopefully not for a few years. Hopefully stays still a senior year. He's that good. I mean, he's 6'4", safety. But calling him a safety is kind of like calling Isaiah Simmons safety last year. The guy can do whatever you want him to do on your defense. They ask him to do a lot in that defense. Had a pass breakup against Duke this past week. He's just so agile for a guy at 6'4". You never guess he's 6'4" until you see him, stretch out an arm and break up a pass. I just think he is basically what you want from a modern just coverage defender. And I think he'll be a pretty high draft pick when he does declare.
He a little bit of a scary moment this week. I figured if he got rolled up on, I was really worried. Apparently he's going to be okay though. Thankfully, after that lower body injury. Is there an individual matchup? Last question for you that you're excited about for this weekend in college football? Any like one-on-ones or anything that you're kind of excited to get a look on or a look at here this Saturday?
Oh man, I actually haven't even looked forward to this slate. Unfortunately, sorry, I should have.
No worries,
looked
man.
Before, but I'm still looking back at last week. I gotta prep this next week here for the podcast tomorrow. So sorry about that.
No worries. Well, Mike, really, really appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for joining us here once again on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Real quick before I cut you loose, let everyone know the podcast, where to follow you on Twitter, any articles, columns that you want to also boost as well.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at PFF_Mike. And then I do a draft podcast with my colleague Austin Gale where we talk about draft rookies. It's called the 2-for-1 Drafts podcast. So if you enjoy that, you obviously do. If you're listening to this, I think you might enjoy ours as well.
Well, Mike, thanks so much once again for joining us here on the show. We'll talk to you again soon, man.
For sure, Fran. Thanks for having me on. Have a good one, man.
Now it's time for Pick Six.
All right, well, back for another edition of Pick Six here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. My friend Ross Tucker. Ross, it was an interesting week. Neither of us were above 500. Let's put it that way. We each picked 6 different outcomes for games last week. Not some straight pick'ems, but some fun little over/unders and either/ors in some of these matchups as well. You went 2-4. I went 3-3. So I'm currently in the lead for the season, and I'll keep track of the pick'ems and everything, each category, how we're each doing. But just a quick refresher. You took the over, or you took the under on Army runs. They actually went the over. I got the point on that one. Neither of us picked the North Carolina receiver correctly. Both of us picked Daz Newsome. It actually was De'Ami Brown over the Syracuse Orange. Sam Ehlinger, I took the over on his 4.5 total touchdowns. He ends up with 5 by halftime. I had to make sure I bragged about that one on Twitter over the weekend. You took the under on 7.5 total sacks between Duke and Notre Dame. You were right on that one. Neither of us picked the Georgia Tech Florida State game correctly. Florida State, that's a rough one, man. And then lastly, the Travis Etienne, both of us took the under, and we were both correct on that one. What'd you think after one full week of doing this, Ross?
It's fun, and it's nice to have a fun rooting interest for these games in our friendly rivalry with each other, number one. Number two, I just want the audience to know I love college football, and I watch as much of it as I can. But Fran is an addict, okay? Fran has problems, and I mean that as a compliment. So if Fran doesn't beat me in this game, something's very, very wrong. Here we go. Fran knows all these guys. He knows everything. Let's do it in the NFL. We can do it in the NFL sometime too. I'd feel a lot better about that. But whatever. I'm the Army thing bugs me because nobody should know Army better than me. But it is what it is. Army's very good. I'm bummed that they're not getting a chance to play BYU Saturday. Yeah, that was actually going to be a sweet game. But we still have some good games, and you got some good ideas this week.
All right, well, let's get to the very first one. And we're going to go Miami versus Louisville. Both teams enjoyed 2 touchdown wins last week over UAB and Western Kentucky, respectively. We're just going to do a straight pick 'em here, Ross. Who gets this win and why? Miami versus Louisville.
I'm going Louisville. I like Mikhail Cunningham, like Tutu Atwell, and, they have some continuity from having been there last year, whereas De'Aaron King, sort of just got there. He's a transfer. Gregory Rousseau opted out. So I'll go with Louisville to get it done.
I like Tutu Atwell, him playing his hometown team. He's from Miami. He went to Northwestern High School. To me, I like Miami here. De'Aaron King is such a playmaker at the quarterback position. I feel like they've got such a fierce pass rush, even without Greg Rousseau. I'm excited about that Miami defensive front. I'll take the Hurricanes here. We'll go a little bit different on this first one. Let's go to the second one here. SMU versus North Texas. Over/under on receiving yards for wide receiver Reggie Robertson Jr., who's the star receiver for SMU. He had 6 for 99 and a touchdown back in week 1 against Texas State. He had 6 for 94 and 2 touchdowns last year against North Texas. He eclipsed the 100-yard mark 3 times in 8 games last year. So that being said, he's hovering right around 100 yards. For a lot of these games I'm talking about. Over/under for the amount of yards that he goes for in this game. I'm going to set it at 99.5. Does he get the century mark in receiving yards, not including rushing yards, against North Texas?
I'm going to go over, and I'm going to go over because his buddy Proche, who was the other receiver last year, is with the Ravens now. And I think as a result, I think Robertson's the guy. I mean, he is the guy. Whereas last year he was kind of sharing it with another NFL guy. This year he's the only NFL guy. And I think they do a good job of scheming him up, even though these teams know he's the guy they're going to target like Texas State does. they still find a way to get him open and get him yards and touchdowns. So I'll go over.
Dude, he is – I don't know if you got a chance to, see him over the last couple of years or anything. He's a West Virginia transfer. He is one of the best deep ball threats in college football. And he's not like Tyreek Hill, Deshaun Jackson, Marquise Brown, that level of explosiveness, but he has got legitimate speed, and he's just an excellent ball tracker. He's got really, really natural ball skills. So excited to see him in this matchup against North Texas. I think there's some shootout potential here in this game, so we're going to see how SMU is able to battle against that North Texas offense. Let's go back to the ACC here. Duke versus Boston College. Straight pick 'em here, Ross. Duke just lost to Notre Dame. I watched all that game. This is Boston College's opener, so they've been getting ready for Duke over the last few weeks. Who wins this game and why?
It's funny because you can go either way with that. It being Duke having a game under their belt and Boston College first game, especially with the new coaching staff. You really don't know what they're going to do with their personnel up there at Boston College. They might do some unique things that surprise people a little bit. But I think you'd rather have the game under your belt. I think you'd rather have actually gotten out there and played and made some mistakes. They played Notre Dame pretty darn tough. And Boston College, I just think, transition, new coaching staff, new schemes. I think Duke gets the win.
I do like Jeff Hafley, who's the new head coach at Boston College. I think that'll be a huge improvement from what they've had in the recent past. But I think when you look, I totally agree with you, and that's the route I would have taken too. In this era, with what this offseason has looked like, with what this summer has looked like, I'm going to take the team that is already kind of, battle tested, had that first game. Boston College, not only do they have the new coaching staff, they lose A.J. Dillon, who was such a huge part of that team last year. I'm going to go with Duke here. I think they come out with the win. Now, let's go to South Florida versus Notre Dame. And I just mentioned I watched all that Duke-Notre Dame game. Which is the higher number, Ross? Notre Dame running back Kyron Williams, who I talked about earlier this week with Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell. He got my game ball for the week. His total touches in the game, or the amount of points that Notre Dame wins by. So we got the Notre Dame versus USF. Interested to get your thoughts on what is the higher number at the end of the day.
I am going to go with the touches for Kyron Williams. I'm going to go with the touches for Kyron Williams because I don't think Brian Kelly – first of all, Notre Dame – it's not like they were dominant against Duke. They won the game, but – they weren't dominant. Duke hung with them pretty tough for a while. Number two, I don't think Brian Kelly wants Ian Book, taking a million shots, getting hit all the time. I think he wants to try to ride the running back, ride Kyron Williams in games like this before they get into more conference play, which sounds weird to say, with Notre Dame. So I'll go Kyron Williams touches.
I just pulled up their schedule from last year, and I'm looking at some of their wins. They beat New Mexico in week 2 last year, 66-14. They beat Virginia by 15. They beat Bowling Green by 52-0. They beat Virginia Tech for 21-20, but then they beat Duke 38-7 last year. They beat the doors off Navy 52-30, 40-7 against Boston College, 45-24 against Stanford, 33-9 against Iowa State. They put a hurting on a lot of people last year. I think I'm actually going to take they lose Chase Claypool. They lost some players on offense. They lost Cole Kmet. But they've got some young players I know that they're excited about in that building. I think I'm going to take the points that they win by here. And look, I love the American Athletic Conference as much as anybody. But, I think to me, I'm going to look at Notre Dame, the amount of the amount of points they win by. I'm going to take that here in this one. Pitt versus Syracuse. All right, so staying in the ACC here. What's the higher number? Syracuse turnovers on defense, so the amount of interceptions and fumble recoveries they make on defense, not how many of the offense turns over, or the amount of Pitt sacks. What do you like here in this one, Ross?
This is the easiest one we had. I think it's Pitt sacks.
Yeah.
I know you love your boy Cisco at safety, but Pickett does a pretty good job of taking care of the football for Pitt, and Pitt's D-line coach is awesome. Anytime I watch Pitt play, his D-line can play. Now, I know Twyman opted out. The D-tackle had a big year last year. But I still think that Pitt's going to get, a good 4 to 5 sacks. I just don't see them turning the football over that much. this is the easiest one on the board.
Yeah, they've got Patrick Jones, who's going to be he's a rising senior, 6'5", 260 pounds. I watched him over the summer, Ross, and I mean, he had 12 TFLs, 8.5 sacks last year. I really do think he's an NFL player. I'm not sure that he's like a high-level starter and a guy that we're looking at is like, oh, man, he's going to be a double-digit sack guy in the NFL year after year. I'm not sure that he's quite that level of player, but I think he's just a well-rounded prospect, has the ability to impact the run. I do like his ability to play at the point of attack, and he's kind of a smart pass rusher, too. I agree. It's a well-coached unit out there at Pitt. That being said, yeah, I agree with you. I like the Pitt sacks here on this one. Last one here, Ross. Western Kentucky versus Liberty. Now, I talked about the Western Kentucky pass rusher D'Angelo Malone last week. D'Angelo Malone was the Conference USA Defense Player of the Year last year. Over/under sack total in this game against Liberty. Set it at an even 1. All right, so he must get 1.5 or more for the over, and half or less for the under. You can call for a push if he gets 1. He did have 1 last week versus Louisville. What are your thoughts here? Are you taking the over under an even 1 on sacks for D'Angelo Malone, the star pass rusher for the Hilltoppers?
You know, it's interesting, Fran, because I did Western Kentucky against Marshall a couple years ago when he was a sophomore. And he stood out to me then. I mean, he was just different. He was one of the best players in the field. He was excellent. And I think he's going to be able to get against Liberty. They're got a decent team, but they're not Louisville. If he got 1 against Louisville, he should be able to get more than 1 against Liberty. So I'll give him the over. As you can tell, I'm kind of an over guy. I'd rather root for these kids to produce more, to do more. So I think he's going to get 1.5.
Not to mention, he's going up against Liberty and this Hugh Freeze. They like to throw the ball, man. Like, he's going to get plenty of opportunities to pin his ears back. I was hoping that you would say, I'm going to take the under. Yeah, I'm taking the over here too. So we got some similarities on this one. We got a couple where we went different, but no, I'm going to take the over here on D'Angelo Malone. Ross, we'll see who comes up with the W here this weekend. Thanks for joining us once again for Pick 6 on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's fun. I bet you have a lot of fun just even coming up with these, Fran, because it's fun for me to go toe-to-toe with you on them.
It's a fun thing to do on a Monday night. What else would I rather be doing while watching Monday Night Football? Well, hope you guys had fun with this episode here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Great stuff from Ross Tucker, Mike Renner, and, of course, Ben Fennell. Ben will be back here with us late on Monday, where he, myself, Dane Brugler, we will recap the entire weekend in college football. I'm sure we'll have a lot of other news to break down as well. Excited to get things going, really, as the college football season kicks into gear. We've got some fun matchups this weekend. Hope you guys enjoy it. We will talk to you next week on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.